Hello and welcome to the Alpha Demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software. I'm pleased to be joined today by our presenter, Sarah Mitchell, who's also our Director of Customer Success and Head of Documentation for that matter. Today, Sarah, like most sessions, is going to do a presentation at the beginning, but we're here to answer your questions as well, and you can type those questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. So let us get started. Hello, Sarah, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can. Let me go ahead and make you the presenter. And there's your screen. Terrific.
Cool.
Oh, cool. Very cool design today. Love it.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Yes, welcome everybody. Glad you can join us this week. To Alpha Newer Q&A. It's been a couple weeks since I've done one of these, so I might be a little bit off. Just as a reminder, our schedule moving forward after today, we're going to talk about cores next week, and then Dion will be back on the 18th to talk about UX component watch events, which is a new feature in the current release of Alpha Anywhere, which is pretty cool. And then on the 25th, we're going to talk about panel cards, panel layouts, panel navigation, how do you do layouts, how do you do navigation. So it's been a while since we've talked about that, and I think you will get a lot out of it on all the places you can sneak animations and add cool transitions to your application. And then the first, we haven't picked a topic just yet, but I guarantee you by next week that will no longer say TBD. So that's what's coming up. Just a reminder, Alpha DevCon 2022 is coming up soon. It's October 18th to 22nd. You can register online at www.alphasoftware.com/devcon 2022. I hope to see you guys there.
And we had a great deal of fun today, sort of
We
hashing out
did.
what the schedule is going to be. So it's going to be
Yes.
exciting. More
Yeah, we
at
are
the
pushing the schedule
session.
out, and I'm definitely going to jump the gun on you guys here in the office and start putting on the call now. You could be at DevCon as a presenter. We would love to have you there if you've got an app that you've built that you want to share, or you've done something cool with Alpha Anywhere, or you think you have some skills that you could offer your peers. We'd love to have you present. We have slots set aside for you. And if this interests you, please, reach out to us. I think we've already had a few people write in over the last
Yeah.
couple of months who are really excited for DevCon and are already asking us if they can present. So I would love to see you there
I
as
bet quite
well.
a few people on this call were the people who signed up in January for the October one, too. So we've got the good group here
Possibly,
today.
yes. No, we'd love to have you present. If you've been to our DevCons in the past, seen those presentations, I mean, we love seeing what you guys are doing, and I'm sure you love to see what other people are doing. That isn't just us telling you what we've done with the product in recent days. So yes, please consider it. Highly encourage you to apply. And with that, we'll get into today's topic, which is more security frameworks, specifically managing users and groups. I believe somebody last week asked, wanting to know more information about how to add some of the new UX templates we've created in recent
Right.
releases to their existing app, and we will talk about that today. Specifically, we're going to look at the new UX template that we've created for managing users and groups in your application. It does require that you are online and connected to the internet. It doesn't work offline, which I don't know anybody that wants all their users and groups offline for management, but we're going to look at that new template and talk a little bit about how you can configure it to look and be the way you need it to be. But before we get into that, for those of you who are new, who are either joining us today for the first time or don't know anything about the security framework, or are watching us on YouTube, like and subscribe. Just a quick overview of the security framework and some of the features that it has in it. So Alpha Anywhere has a built-in security framework that can be used to add a login interface so that you can validate access credentials before serving a request. So somebody logs into your application and they click on a button that's going to open up a UX component. The security framework will check to make sure they are allowed to view that component before it gives them that access. And that access can be restricted as on a whole page, on a component, or even at individual control, or in the case of, I believe, lists and grids, even let you add security credentials on fields before a SQL query is made to just ensure that that data isn't even being downloaded if they aren't allowed to see it. Um, So with regards to security framework, there are really 3 categories of access that exist. Something can be always allowed, as in anybody is allowed to see this all day, any day, every day. An example of that would be your login page. You would definitely want anybody who isn't currently logged in to be able to access your login page and then log in. So that would be something that would be always allowed. There's always denied, which is the system default, thus forcing you to make a conscious decision as to whether or not content should be allowed always or require a login. And then the third one is requires login. And these settings apply to files like your web pages and your components. So when we get down to the control level, it's really, that's always a requires login thing. But with respect to requires login, that decides whether or not someone is allowed to access something, whether based on what rules. I'm mixing up group and roles. What groups they are in. So when somebody creates an account in the security framework, they can be added to groups. And those groups are used in Alpha Anywhere to control the access to things. This is a general overview of what you can do with the security framework. If you're not very familiar with it, you can do login and logout. You can create users and roles and manage those. You can do something called account locking, which locks out a user, thus preventing them from being able to log in or change their password or any of that stuff. They just will not be allowed in the system. Some of the new UX templates that we've added include forgot password and reset password built in, which was something that was a little bit tricky in the past to get set up right at times. Again, you can restrict access to pages, components, controls, or fields in your app. Other things that exist are two-factor authentication, which we talked about recently. There's something called persistent login. We haven't done a presentation on that yet, but we should consider it in the future. There's another thing called alternative login, which was recently added. We recently added a feature for that called Google login in the UX component. So if you're using the UX as your login component, you can actually enable that and thus let people log into your app using their Google credentials and not just the ones they've created in the security framework, or instead of creating credentials in the security framework is how I should phrase that. That does work across the board for all apps, no matter where they're deployed. We have other forms of alternative login that are currently won't work on IIS or Alpha Cloud if you come across them, and it's just because of how they're configured. They're set up using the old login component, and we just haven't gotten to that point yet where we've moved on to getting that support there yet, but we are working on it. We have something called the Extended User Information Table, which is a special table that is linked to the user record. So you can store information in there that you might want to collect. Perhaps you want to collect their address. That's not a field we store by default in the security framework, but it's one that you could store in the Extended User Information Table. And then we have an API for doing server-side scripts and stuff. And by that, I mean like XBasic functions for doing things like creating a new user, resetting their password, looking up someone's groups, and that kind of stuff. So just as a little overview of what is a user and what is a group, a user within the security framework is a username and password, which is used to log into your application. And a group, which is also called a role on IIS, it's called a role in Alpha Cloud and places, I believe, as well. Groups are just collections of users. It's a way to assign a role or identifier to someone. So you have a user account, sam@example.com, and they are in the group users and a group called administrators, and that sort of just indicates that this person has authorization for anything an administrator can do and anything a user can do. Groups can have multiple users in them. Users can be assigned to multiple groups. And then the groups are also used to restrict the access to page components or controls in your development environment, which is something important to note. In the development environment is very, very key when you're working with groups, especially if you want to add new ones, and we'll talk about that today. And then specifically what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about creating a UI to manage users and assign groups, and we're going to create it by just using the new UX template that we have. I'm going to talk a little bit about seed users and groups, and we're going to start using this terminology more. to kind of explain to you, what's the difference between your users in your development environment and the users up on your production environment. We'll touch on how you update groups. Say you go down the road for a bit and then you realize you need to add a new group. Talk about what you need to do to update those, and then also talk about integrating the new security UX templates into an existing application. It's actually very easy. So hopefully you guys are, hopefully that will answer your questions. And then we're just going to get right into the live demo. All right, so I'm going to start with a blank project and turn on the security framework this way rather than trying to start with an existing project, because it's a bit easier to see what is in there for you right now that we generate, what you have access to. And so I've got a new project here in Alpha Anywhere. This one is running Community Edition. And I'm going to come over to the Web Security button here, and I'm just going to click this link down here, use the quick setup genie to automatically set up the web security settings. If you have an existing app that already has security enabled, you don't need to do this to get access to things. Because what this does is it generates a bunch of temporary users and groups that you can use. So I'm just going to accept the sample defaults here. I'm not going to turn on any extended user information table or any system tables today. If you enable these, there's a whole bunch of stuff you can automatically create in addition to some users and groups, and adding all the sample components that you can use to have access into that interface. But yeah, some of this stuff requires a database where you can store that information. Definitely extended user information table, and actually all of these require a database where you can store it. But if you want to do stuff security, maybe there's some other system tables that you want to use. We have like an auditing setup, or if you want to include help and stuff. These are added here for convenience, so you can just turn them on now when you're getting this stuff all set up, because a few of them are related to security. But we're not going to do that. We're just going to take these simple defaults here. I'm going to click yes, enable security framework. It's going to say it's been enabled. That's great. And then I get a screen here that tells me the user ID that was created and the password and what groups they were added to. It's a bit hard to tell what this says with the spacing, but it's really user1alpha.com. Their password is user1alpha. They're in the group administrator. The next one is in group 2, group 3, and so on and so forth. And if you click this link, you can copy that to the clipboards for your easy reference if you want to use those to log into your app. And I'm going to do that now. Put them over here in Notepad. So there's my user ID and there's my password, just so I have that. You'll see this prompt. This notice always comes up whenever a new component is added to your project, no matter the source. It's just a notice that Alpha Anywhere needs to analyze your components to decide what kind they are. So we have UX components, but we also have grid components, tabbed UI components, that kind of stuff. And the other thing you're going to get asked if you go through this is you're going to ask, where do you want the image in your login component to be? The login component contains an image. The image can be placed on the left-hand side or behind. You can change that yourself after it's been created. I like to put it in the back so everything's center. If it's off on the left, the login is on the right, so it kind of squishes it to the side. But these are all the files that get generated for you when you turn that on. This stuff down here, these web security groups, members and users, DBF tables, these are local tables generated for you, in this case in Community Edition, to contain all of your seed users and groups. So seed users and groups are where you start when you're developing an app, when you're doing stuff with the security framework in development and you need to test things, you need some users to log in with to test that. And with respect to developing an app that has the security framework enabled, you have to have those groups defined so you can actually add the restrictions in your application. So the seed users and groups are the groups and the users used to not only develop your app, but that very first time you publish it, all that information is also published. Your users, your groups, and then the relationship between the two is published up to wherever you deploy your application. In the case of Alpha Cloud, that information is copied into a security application on cloud, which isn't a DBF file. It's a whole different thing. Alpha Cloud manages your users and groups for you on Alpha Cloud, so you don't have to supply a database, and it doesn't need to make any, connection to a third-party system to figure out if someone has authorization to log into your application. In part to simplify things for you, but also because users and groups kind of actually just do need to be with your app where it's published, because if there's a connectivity problem and it can't reach your database where those users are stored, no one can log in. So, and internet isn't perfect, network connections aren't always stable, and interruptions can happen. So it's part about why they're up there. So you'll see DBF tables here. They're not ever published, but they are used locally, and you can access them when you're developing using the web security button. So if we click on it and we come in here, we get this users and groups button. You click on that and click OK. These are all the users and all the groups that were created in my seed user tables. And you can switch between these two tabs. You can edit these, you can modify these. If you don't like that administrator is on all caps, you can make it lowercase. You can change it to admin. It's not going to affect who has membership in that. The groups are actually a name and then stored internally as a unique identifier so that it's difficult to guess. And then users, you can select them here and manage their groups. So and then you have add, edit, and delete user down here. The components here that get generated for you, we make a login component. There's a reset password component. So if you have reset password enabled, which you can turn off if you don't want to have that available to the user on the front end. When they log in, there's an option that's on by default to reset the password, but you can turn that off if you don't want it. That reset password stuff happens in this component. There's a two-factor authentication preference component where if you have included the extended user information table, then you can also turn on two-factor authentication. So people have to provide like a Google Authenticator app code or something sent in an SMS text message or email, some code that they have to enter to prove who they are. This component contains that information. In fact, I'm going to filter this on components real quick since there's so much in there. There's that. There's an extended user information component that just lists the extended user information that's stored. So if you add your own stuff, this is where you can come and edit that component to add the fields that you want to provide access to edit. And then the new one that we released very recently is this one called admin maintain users and groups. So we're going to take a look at this one. And this new component has a whole bunch of stuff in it, and it might be a little bit daunting to look at, but it's not that much stuff. What it has is it has a list control that lists all the users in the system. And then there's a text box that filters that list so you can, if you have a lot of users, you can search using that filter. A bunch of buttons for doing like creating a new user, editing existing user, exporting your user information. A placeholder and static text control that is used to display import progress. So as you're importing users from an Excel file, this will display the progress bar on the screen. I believe the placeholder is used to show update information during import. So that's this container one, and then container two is your groups, and it has two buttons on it for saving group assignments. So when you can select users from the user list and it displays the groups for that user as either checked or unchecked. And then you can use this list to change those groups and save those assignments, or there's another button that if you tap it, it displays a window that lists all the users. And this is what's all contained on a tab called users. So that's all you have on this tab. And then there's a second tab in there called groups, which is the opposite. It has a list of groups on the left-hand side. And when you select a group, it displays or updates this list on the right-hand side. That is all the users and what users are in that group. And you can use little checkboxes to add and remove people from the group on this tab as well. Again, there's a filter option, buttons to create new groups or delete groups, and then buttons to save the changes for a user assignment and also show all the users for a selected group in a pop-up window. And those little pop-up windows are all down here at the bottom. And these are used in various places. If you edit a user, that shows this created edit user pop-up. If you create a group, there's a pop-up to specify the new group name. There's a details pop-up that shows details for whatever item you've selected, either like the list of users in a group or the list of groups for a user. And then finally, there's a little help window that has some help text in it, defined in the static text control. And it looks like it's populated dynamically. And right now it has a little placeholder in there. So, but that's all the controls that are in here. We can look at the actual implementation. So I've already gone and published this previously earlier up on Alpha Cloud just to show you what that is. So here's our list on the left here. You pick a user, it updates the groups on the right eventually. And then here we have our groups, group 3, group 4. This might be slow because it's been over 15 minutes since I logged in. Oh, I'm in a live test. This isn't gonna work at all. Oh, my bad. Let's go look at the Alpha Cloud one. So if we come over here to Alpha Cloud on the Web Projects Control Panel, and I go down to View Cloud, and I verify who I am, and we pick the CE test. This is where I published it. And I click on that link. And we log in. This administrator only section, maintain users and groups. That's what we were looking at, that live test window that wasn't valid anymore because I did a live test a while ago. So when you click on this, this is that component we just quickly ran through about what was in it. As you select different users, this updates to show you what groups they're in. There's Sarah, there's user 5 down here. If you click to show all the groups, it just simply lists the groups that they're in. You can want to filter, maybe you're looking for user 3. That's how the filter works. And then the groups is something similar. You pick administrator, it's going to show a little checkbox next to who's in that group. These two are in group 2. If we pick users, everyone's in users. There's an option up here to select all if that's what you want to do. And again, this button does show those selected users. I'll clear that search out. So creating a new user, if you need to create one manually, it's very simple. This won't apply when you're creating a user, but the lock user account is also available here in edit user. If you lock an account, they can't log in anymore, they can't change their password, they can't do anything. You know, if you've got an internal system and someone's leaving, then you can lock them out. We'll unlock that user for now. But this is all up on published up on Alpha Cloud. So we go back in here. Oh, I remember the other thing I wanted to show you. It was that help text. There's a help button somewhere. It might only be in live preview, so let's take a look at that. And this is in terms of new components. This one's really nice. I really like this one. Maybe working preview, because this is a application that requires security. You can't use live and working preview very often to test. Where did I see a help button? Help text. I'm not imagining this. I definitely saw it, found it earlier. If somebody saw it, let me know. Check the question really quick. You know, I cannot.
It's hiding.
I can't remember where I saw it. But I remember that it opened up this big wall of text. Oh, okay. I found it.
There we
It's
go.
the help for import. So use the find feature. Thank you. So there's the import has a little help window that pops open, and I just wanted to show this to you because this may be something that you want to modify, and the place you would modify this is, I believe it's over here in the JavaScript. I hope it's over here in the JavaScript somewhere. Let's see here. There it is. So here's the help text that's inserted there. You might not like the font choices, the coloring, that kind of stuff. So you can come in here and just edit this function. It's called show import help. There's a lot of stuff in here, so you can actually use this little drop down. It's a little drop down arrow, and it shows the name of the function that currently has focus. If you've got your mouse cursor within it. But if you click on this and come down here and you just find show import help, that help text where it's setting that inner HTML, that's where you're going to locate the content to update for your needs. If you don't want that help at all, you can come in here and just edit that import button itself. It's actually in JavaScript. It has a click event, and it has a little menu of data here. You would just come in here and you would just remove it. Just delete everything, including the comma. So I know people are going to get to this and they're going to want to change it up. You want to get rid of things, maybe add your own twist on the layout. But I just want to show you just a few things I thought about today when I was looking at this, like where you might want to go change it. Another thing that you might want to do if you are a web application and all you're using this in a desktop environment where you have a mouse and a keyboard, maybe you want to get more screen space. You can come in here and you can turn on the compact theme to reduce the size of all those controls. So if we look at working preview real quick, you'll see the big difference there. By default, the alpha theme renders stuff large because we're assuming that you're building mobile apps and hands are large and chunky. The mouse pointer not so much. So you can see how much smaller that is. And now maybe you don't need the full width of the screen here. You could possibly cram this down into a smaller space. Maybe you want this side by side with something else. With the design itself on these controls, they are placed inside of a tab container. If you want to switch that over to a panel card layout, that's pretty easy to do. You would take out those tabs and you would swap in your panel layout or your panel navigator if you want to do a panel navigator and have a tab-like interface or something different to do the layout there. You can certainly leave everything inside the containers, that's fine. Excuse me. If you don't want to export, import, you just remove these buttons to get rid of it, to trim it down. If you want to edit those windows, those pop-ups that you saw, those are all down here at the bottom of the screen. Maybe you don't want extended user information on here. You could take it over and take it off. So those are places you might want to look at it. I know I've got quite a few people asking, like, how do I upgrade my app to use this? And the answer is simply create these new UX components in your app. So I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to make a new project. Click OK. I'm going to turn on the web security framework again. I'm not going to make those sample components. We'll just stick to one user, one group. So we have one user, they're an administrator. But I didn't make any of those components. I don't have any of those files. I just have the web security groups, my seed users and groups, basically. So if I want to add in, like, pick and choose what I want, maybe I have an existing app, wrong button, or I want to swap out what I've got, it's all of those components that you saw are defined as UX components. And if you go in and you create a new UX and you look for security, here is our new admin maintain users and groups component. There's a login component. It's one of these three. So, we can add this one. This is the UX for that was generated before. And then all you really need to do after this is just drop this in place of whatever your current, whatever it is that you want to replace. Let's add the login component. Something I find that's actually easier to get the login component is to pick login, and then it asks me what kind of component style I want. This is actually inserting the UX login component. Now on Community Edition, this is what you're going to see. On the full development environment, you may be asked, do you want to create a legacy login component or the new UX login component? If you pick the new UX login component, it's going to give you what we saw, or what you've seen, that the security framework generates, and you will have to name it login. Cool. We'll create a new backup there. So this is that login component. I'm going to take a look at it on working preview. It's going to be that login UI with the image in the back and the two buttons. If it loads. It doesn't want to load. Let's go back and change our page security settings. All files, close. I'm going to investigate that pop-up that we saw just now. But what you should see is that other one. Let's go back to default. Oh, not that page. Here we go. Maybe it wants a full preview. Let's do a live test. Again, security framework, testing the security framework. Because it does those checks and sometimes requires login, you often cannot test it in the IDE. I was hoping that we could just get a preview of this so I wouldn't have to go to live test, but this is that component. And you really just need to drop this in place of whatever you're currently using. That's all you really need to do. And we have documentation on, let me find that for you, the security login. Everything that we're adding is also being added as a UX template. So you can definitely drop it in to your existing apps to swap out whatever you've got. And because it's already designed to work with the security framework, there isn't really much more that you need to do. There we go. Login UX component. And let me find the chat. I'll paste this in here. We did a presentation a few weeks ago on this, possibly a few months at this point. Definitely go back and check that out. See what we did. When we did DevCon last year, we started with this new UX login, and we tweaked it for the needs of our Farmington app, which wasn't particularly, it wasn't too much work to make that work. We swapped out some colors and we changed the images. So these are all really customizable. So that's an overview. Not a lot of edits to this today. I'm sure some people have some questions because I'm looking at questions and I see I will ask Sarah. Has a lot of these replies.
We have a lot of questions, and we often do when it comes to the security setup, but could we start just sort of high level? So we've been talking about this as sort of like our new security thing, but
Oh, I forgot
in
something.
reality, it's not exactly a new security framework, right?
No,
We've added
it's
some
not.
genies to make it easier, and we've added some new UX components and a new way of setting up a login component. But the security system itself remains the same in the back, which is
Yeah,
why you don't have to make major changes to your app, because that seems to be the big question that everyone's asking is if I want these new features in my app, like let's say I wanted to do two-factor authentication or have the forget password, whatever the new thing is, that, how do you do it? And
yeah.
it sounds like the answer is
You turn it
you
on.
add these components to your app, right? Like, so if
Yep.
you've got security already turned on and you want the new login component, and the login component is sort of a different case because, as you said, it might be better to add that login component by when you do new for components, just choosing login as opposed to UX because it sets it up for you.
So the easiest way to get the new login UX is to go through just adding a login component.
Yeah.
Which
Can you
if you're
show us
using
that
Community
dialog? I
Edition,
didn't
that's
see it.
what you're gonna get. If you have the full Developer Edition, you will, I believe you are prompted to ask you which one, and we would really like it if you picked the UX instead, because that login UX, we've done a ton of work over here in properties, and I want to point this out. All the customization on login is done here. It uses
Yeah.
this has integrated login functionality, so you can build a single app, or if you want to navigate to another page, that's cool too. But it like handles a lot of that stuff for you, so you don't have to write any XBasic on the back end to do the login and the logout. That all happens magically for you. All the configuration in here. What's the control where they set their username? Was the control where they set their password? Where should I display the errors if there's a login problem? If you want to, configure account settings and stuff that if somebody creates a new account, there's a bunch of settings in here. Like you could require that if someone submits a new account request on that register page, that an administrator has to approve it before they can even log in. You can turn that on here. You can turn on emailing to people,
Mhm.
notify your administrators if someone creates a new account. You can call X basic if they do something. Maybe you want to, set up a bunch of, like, initialize a bunch of data in a database that
Mhm.
has something that they maybe you got a
Okay.
SaaS service and you just want to set up some defaults for a new user and add all the information in, but it's got to happen on the back end when they create their account.
Yeah.
That's where you could do this. If you want to turn on additional features or turn off existing features, um, password reset. All the information about password resets configured here. All the text that's shown. If you don't like that we said, please enter your user ID, you can change it. You could remove it. Um, there's a email account information is specified in here, who sends that email when they get a password reset message. Your new password container configuration is in here, your new account container. If you have enabled the extended user information, that gets configured. If you don't want that, if you don't want a lot of people to create an account, you just turn it off so it doesn't get shown anymore. Uh, all this stuff is here, and we've got extensive documentation on configuring these things for the login component because that's a big piece. But the
Excellent.
real nice thing is that it handles those things like I forgot my password or I would like to create an account. That's now in there. And in the past
Okay.
it people
So
got
that
tripped
brings
up
us
on that.
to the very next question, which is what's the current best practice for current security components for forget my password? If you wanted to do a forget my password, you want to use this login component in particular, is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, if you've implemented something yourself, you know, that's fine. I don't think in prior versions of Alpha Anywhere before we
You
introduced this
might
that
you
it was
might
up to
just find
you
it
to do
easier
forget password.
to scrap your existing login probably and build the new
Yeah,
UI. So, and you can have them both, right? You can test them out at the same time. You know,
yeah,
they'll
yeah.
both log in. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to do a
They
login
all log in
where, you know, you send
2.85W.
a
Yeah.
temporary password and they've got to log in, otherwise it doesn't. I believe the way it works is it sends them an email and they've got a time period to log in. If they don't log in and change their password, then it doesn't change it.
That's right. Yep.
But yeah,
It does, right? There's a time limit behind that.
uh-huh,
10 minutes, something
yeah,
like that. It's not very
yeah.
long.
You know, and the other nice thing that this has too with the UX component is that you can turn on two-factor authentication. Um, that gets set, I believe, in the web security configuration somewhere. It's either here or in the web project settings. I didn't see it there. This
Speaking
is
of
the
which,
project properties.
someone brought up sort of an interesting thing. They said when they shut off, let me see if I read this right. When they shut off the ability to change the password, for some reason their options for two-factor authentication seem to go away
There
as
we go.
well.
The ability to change the password turned off the two-factor auth settings.
Right, that is what they said. Oh, there they are right here on web project properties. Thanks. We'll take a look at that because I don't think that's
Yeah,
their
send that
intention.
to us. That sounds a
Yeah,
bit weird. Yeah, so two-factor
yeah.
authentication is set up. It's configured in the web project properties. Again, we did a
Mhm.
demo on this a while ago, but very recently. This is where you set it all up in the web project. You know, you need to, if you're going to use Twilio, you got to provide that information. If you're going to use email, you got to provide us some information about that. So it's coming from your app. And I believe on the email, if you're going to do email, I think we read that out of email settings, which is up here.
Mhm.
Your project. So,
Okay, good.
and then also extended user security info. If you didn't set it up, but you want to turn it on, you come here and you configure that table information, so on and so
Gotcha.
forth. Yeah.
Mm.
Before we go on to another question, I wanted to talk
Mhm.
briefly about, we're just going to look at security applications, and this is going to pertain to Alpha Cloud, but some of this also applies to you if you are using um, the
IIS.
classic or IIS application server.
Yeah.
And forgive the very slowness and bizarre flashing that's going to happen here, but the way Alpha Cloud, so we talked about seed users and roles, and so the first time you publish your application up, that information goes up to your application server, and Alpha Anywhere never asks, you know, what are your groups, what are your roles? Those are the same thing. What are your users? That's up there, and it's isolated outside of your project. So if at some point in the future you decide you need a new group, um, you might think that you could just add it in your web project up on the server and add it locally and it will work, but it will not, because the group name that is shown to you is not what's actually stored internally, and it's not the value that gets used when it's validating security access. So when you want to add a new group to your application, you need to add it locally in your development environment. And then when you're ready to publish, in Alpha Cloud specifically, you need to go and you need to find your security application, which is the thing that stores all your users and roles for your published app. I published this primary CE test/test accidentally one day, but that was the one I was using today as well. And so when I published my app hub earlier, I had created a new app with new users and different groups, and all that information was different from what had been there before. So when I first published, it did not publish all of my users and group information because I was publishing to something that's been published to before and already had an existing security application. So I actually had to come in here and publish the project users and roles, or public the project users and groups. Groups and roles are the same thing.
Mhm.
I had to do that separately. And when you do that, there are a bunch of options. So if you're reusing a deployment for something new and you want to overwrite everything, you can come in here and just be like, replace everything. just replace. In the case of adding a new group, you probably want to just merge roles to add that new role up there, and then you can go up onto the server and add people into that group that needs access to things. If you're deleting roles, you probably want to replace roles so those roles don't exist anymore, so people can't put people in those roles when you're not going to use them anymore. So optional, if you remove a role in your development environment, you could optionally just go up and delete it through that users and groups management tool to remove it. But in terms of Alpha Anywhere, development, if you're adding a group and you're using it to, restrict access to a component or a field, you do want to make sure that you are merging that group, that role, up into what you have on the server. It's much, much harder to go the opposite direction to figure out what that stuff was and get it down here into the DBF.
So the
And
order
that's the
is,
same case. Yeah.
so make the change in the IDE to add your
Yes.
role, then come here, merge the role
Merge it.
with what you've got up on the server.
Yeah.
And you're all set.
Yeah,
Cool.
just wanted to point that up. Yeah. So
Yeah.
and also if you were using your Alpha Cloud deployment sites, because we do restrict the $99 plan to 5. If you want to reuse one of those, you probably may need to come in here and manually replace everything that's up there.
So actually, that also brings up another question. I'm going a little bit out of order, but I'm going to jump back to the top of the list. And that is that if I've got some apps that don't need security and some that do, and I want to have it on the same server, can I do that?
On the same server?
I think the answer is kind of, right? So I guess what you'd imagine would be essentially different web pages, but being served by the same instance of Alpha Anywhere. And one would require a login and one wouldn't. And really, if you've got the web security framework running on the server, it applies to the whole server. On the other hand, that doesn't mean that you couldn't have pages that don't require a login. In fact, that's one of the options for each one of the pages is that you can set it to don't require a login, and it'll treat it as if the security framework pretty much didn't exist for that page or that component.
Yeah, that's in page security.
Yeah.
Page security is all set in the development environment. If you change anything here, it's going to get published up with those changes. A green checkbox means it's always allowed. But if you, let's see here. I forget. I believe this one can't be set because it's used in the security framework.
Oh, I see what you mean, yeah.
As one of the settings. We'll go look at it. But this one, this tab master UI. Interesting. I'm wondering why I can't.
Go to all files. An individual is the deal. Yeah, that was on folders.
Oh, okay. Right click.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure this out. This is if you've selected more. So there. That don't change that one. If you right click on it, it says always denied, always allowed, requires login.
Right.
So
these something like login should always be required because you're not logged in yet, and that's what you do.
If you wanted to require a login, you have to select a group. If you don't select a group, that's anyone can access it unless you've set it to explicitly no. So that's pages and folders, if folders are listed in here. And then your component security is over here, which is just sort of an extra step you can add, where if you've got a tabbed UI and you're serving up components, but you really want to restrict some of those to only allow people to access it if they have permission, you can definitely put that on the button to display it. But as an extra step, you should also make sure that you're putting that restriction on the component itself in case you forget to do that somewhere if you're using Action JavaScript to show it. And it's the same thing. You right click on it, select it, right click it, and then pick what one you want. So
we have a bunch of questions here today. We may not go through all of them. So it's just a reminder, send them to guides, GUIDES @alphasoftware.com if we don't get to your question during the session. But let's start with a quick question. Does the forget password feature work with the IIS server?
Yeah, so this all works with IIS.
Cloud.
I was just doing it on cloud, and cloud is IIS. So yeah, it all works.
Yep, great.
Yep. 100%.
We've gone over, forgot my password. Oh, here's a good one. Persistent login, which I know you said you weren't going to talk about today, but can you sort of summarize what that means? Does that mean what does it prevent the user from being logged out when the session is too long? Is the question that someone wrote in.
Sort of. The way
Okay.
persistent login works is it stores something called a JWT, a JavaScript Web Token, on the client machine, and
Hmm.
then the next time they visit your site, that token gets served up to the server, and the server decides at that point, like, looks at that token and says, "Oh yeah, you're still allowed access now," and will automatically just log you in. Um, and if you're not, then it tells you you have to log in again.
Excellent.
That's a really, really oversimplification of what it does. So,
Well, but
but yeah, it uses tokens on the client. So anybody that has access to that machine and opens up your app will, if they've previously logged in and still have a valid access, it will log them in again.
I believe we use something like that for transform, which was
We
certainly an
do use
option
something
here.
like that for transform.
So that you don't get logged out after 15 minutes. You get logged out after, well, we've set it to a couple of days, but you could decide when that token's going to expire. Let's see. Is there how do you change the background image on the login page?
All right, that's a good question, and I'm glad
Yeah.
someone asked that. So,
Yeah.
which login page do they have? I'll show you the one where it's behind, but if it's the other one, it's a little different.
Okay.
Um, but for the one where the login is in front of the image is stored on the panel itself. And so if you select your panel login and you
Mhm.
locate the has background image name, that
Yeah.
information is right here. The image is actually stored in the component as a base64 encoded image file. You can come in here and change it. If you don't want it at all, you just turn it off. It's gone.
So if you wanted to change that image, do you need to encode your image first in base64? Is that the
No,
idea? Or
no.
do we have
We
a tool for
encoded
that?
it so that
Okay.
this component could just be dropped
Uh,
in as is, and we wouldn't have to also make sure you got all the other files that it needed.
that makes sense.
You can use this base64 encoded image
Hmm.
feature to put in an image that gets encoded and stored in the component. And then
Yeah.
if you wanted to save that as a template, which you can do, that's just stored in the template. You don't have to worry about how you're going to get that information to someone's project or your next project, those images,
Cool.
because they're already here.
Plus, you have all these other options here for things.
Yeah,
Someone
you
said that
built
they
in
tried
image, you
building
could do a
one of the,
UL.
yeah. Someone said
Yeah,
they tried building a background image and they said it didn't scale well. It got a bit blurry. So, maybe select a different image, maybe do the base 64 and run it
you
through
do a
base
higher res
64 encoder
image. It sounds
or a
like
high res
it
image.
just
Yeah,
needs to be
that
higher
really
res.
might be the case. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep. Yep.
yeah. Images can get tricky at times,
Yep.
especially if you're building for extremely large screens. You might need a really large image.
Yep. Um, okay, let's see what else we've got. We have a couple people just running into some pretty specific issues. If you have a specific issue that's bugging you about the security framework, like something weird, send it over to us at Guides so that we have time to go through it.
Yes, definitely do that.
Um, when will this video be uploaded? We usually have videos up in about 2 days, but if we're
2 business
slow,
days.
I'm sorry, 2 business days. However,
Mhm.
there's no holiday between now and Friday, so I think we'll be okay. So by Friday, if you've got a question, or if you need an advanced copy and we haven't gotten it up quickly, send an email to guides@alphasoftware.com. I can pass along the links to you. No problem there. Let's see. Do we support Duo or Octa? I don't think we do. I think those are.
Remind me again what those are.
Yeah, I just gotta
What
check.
is that? I I think I know what Octa is, but I am not familiar with Duo.
Okta integration, it is.
MFA
It's a type of
services.
two-factor authentication. So no, I think
Multi-factor authentication services.
yeah,
Okay, gotcha.
yeah, we do our own for two-factor authentication. Hence Duo too. I like that name.
I don't think we support those just yet, but we can certainly Send in a feature request.
Yeah, it's a multi-factor authentication service. So we have kind of written that portion of it, but absolutely write into us if you'd be interested in that. Okay, and then the question is, how would you migrate? Ooh, this is a really good question. Let's say you're on Alpha Cloud and you're like, you know what? I'm gonna not use Alpha Cloud anymore. I'm gonna go host it myself. Gonna spin up something on AWS, get a web server license and so on. How would you move, or can you move your web security settings from the cloud over to IIS? Can they be exported and moved? Migrating to cloud.
I don't know that answer offhand.
Yeah. But this looks like a great resource for a lot of these questions. Yep. I don't
We've
know.
had this
So write
conversation
that one
before
in.
with some people have tried to do this, but I do not believe we actually have any information on how that works. We very much want you to go to Alpha Cloud and stay there. Why would you leave us?
Exactly. But we'll be nice. We'll help you if you send an
We
email
do
to
have
Todd.
migrating roles from Classic to Alpha Cloud, which is
Yeah.
similar to just publishing your seed users. Going the other
Mhm.
way, I do not believe we have much information on that. If you are in the Alpha Cloud um, security applications, there's a button and a, a lot of red text about the button for doing a backup
Mhm.
and a restore. It's very experimental. I don't know if that's what you would
Honestly, email us
need.
because we're almost certainly
Yeah,
going to have to ask one of our developers to the answer to that question. But if you need to do it, we can help you out. So,
yeah, that's the only thing I can think of.
yeah. And then, oh, this is a really good question, and I wish we had more than 3 minutes to cover it. Although, who knows? Alpha Launch. People love using Alpha Launch because it means you don't have to submit your app to the App Store or Google Play.
Hmm.
It's already there. You just point it at your server, and your users are off to the races, as they say. The question is, though, is login supported
Yes.
with Alpha Launch? Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the login page is yours, right? So you build
Yeah.
the login component or whatever. The
Hmm.
login component makes a callback to your server to do all the authentication, and there's nothing in Alpha Launch that restricts
It's just
that.
part of your app,
Yeah,
and
it's just
Alpha
part of your
Launch will run
app.
your app. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So, if you're having trouble like making that work, there are a couple things you need to make sure you did. Like you need to make sure that you set your same site cookie policy when you publish your application to unset, which if you're going to IIS or Alpha Cloud is set in the project properties. If you're using Classic Server, it's in the Classic Server settings. This
Yep.
is the thing that everybody I know who has had
With Alpha
problems
Launch
like didn't
especially, right?
do.
Yeah.
Yes, Alpha Launch is a mobile app, and the same site cookie stuff, you're making a third party web service call basically, because when it's running on the mobile app is the website.
Yeah.
The device is the website and is making a third party call to your application server, which is hosted somewhere else. And you need to change that same site cookie setting just so that it will accept cookies that we use to just verify that we're sending the right information back to the right person. So
Okay, so and now here's another question, and maybe and I know we've done an Alpha Launch one recently, haven't we, for webinars, or has it been a
we did
while?
an alpha launch presentation. We say recently. I think it was like over 6 months ago at this point because time is
Okay, well,
way
let's
more than
not
6 months because it's
let's
May.
not be so if you do want to dig in, there is more information. Maybe it's time to do another one. But so this question was, where does Alpha Launch store your app? If it keeps it sort of inside the Alpha Launch app, and
It's on
and
the file system, but I don't know
it's stored in
specifically
the
where.
file system. And before that, you do need to put it up on a server so that Alpha Launch knows where to pull your app from to put it onto the device. So
Yep.
that's how it works. But yeah, we'll probably be talking a lot more about Alpha Launch. It's so much simpler than the other ways of getting things, especially when you're, I'm sorry, so much simpler when it comes to deploying apps to mobile devices. And that's doubly true when it comes to iOS. You can sideload stuff onto Android, but iOS is a trickier business. Well, that looks like all the time we have. Sarah, thank you very much for presenting. Thanks everyone for asking those questions, and do keep sending them in by sending them to guides@alphasoftware.com. Hope to see you at our next Alpha demo and Q&A webcast. Until then, take care and stay well. Bye-bye.